transforming forces or velocities or angular velocities from one frame to second frame, we used
Yes.
only one rotation matrix. But
Okay.
in case of inertia matrix or omega cross or alpha cross, we are using similarity transform where we are using two matrices. Why is it so?
Well, I mean, at the most, we need to note that uh, uh, we are talking of slightly different quantities here. So when we are transforming angular velocity or linear velocity from one frame to another or accelerations, we are talking of vectors. So these are 3 by 1 vectors usually. So vector in one frame has a different representation in another frame, and the two are related by a single matrix, okay, single rotation matrix. On the other hand, if you look at inertia matrix or angular velocity matrix or any other such matrices, they are not vectors, they are 3 by 3 matrices, right? So the way matrices transform when the coordinate frame is changed is different from the way vectors transform when the coordinate frame is changed. Okay, so since they are not identical quantities, they are not the same. A vector transformation is just through a rotation matrix, and these other inertia matrix and angular velocity matrix transformation is through similarity transformation. Okay, and the other way to also look at it is to note that these matrices, inertia matrix or whatever, relate one vector to another. Okay, so for example, the inertia matrix relates the angular momentum vector to the angular velocity vector, and the angular velocity vector relates the position vector to the linear translational velocity vector, because p dot is equal to omega cross operating on p. Now, each of these vectors, whether it be angular momentum and angular velocity, they transform according to these rotation. Just you need to multiply them with the appropriate rotation matrix. As a consequence, how will the appearance of the same equation be in the new coordinate system? The representation of angular momentum in the new coordinate system would be related to the representation of the angular velocity in the new coordinate system by means of a new inertia matrix. And the way they are, each of these are represented separately. If you go from one frame to another, you have to multiply with the rotation matrix to obtain the new angular momentum. Likewise, the new angular velocity. To have a similar relationship, you have to therefore have a similarity transformation for the inertia matrix to be performed.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, good
Good
morning, sir.
morning, sir.
Good morning, Rajpal.
Sir, I'm
Tell me.
Dinesh.
Dinesh, is it? Rajpal also just now raised his hand. So I'll
Yes.
take Rajpal's question first, and then Dinesh, I'll come to you.
So actually, in the Newton Euler's equation, the forward recursion, I think you missed the term in the linear velocity recursion. There should be an angular velocity term and a linear velocity term, but you have only mentioned the angular velocity term along with the relative term.
Uh, I don't have the notes of that with me right now. But I mean, can you please, if you have that PDF or something, can you annotate that PDF and send that to me? I will take a look at it. Okay.
Okay, sir.
It may be an algebra mistake. I cannot claim that when I'm writing something live, I would. It's difficult to keep track of everything, so I can take a look at it. Kindly send it to me. Kindly underscore whatever you think is missing and send it to me. Okay.
Okay, sir, sure.
Okay. Thanks. And Dinesh had a question, right?
Sir, this is Swash plate, na, sir. There, sir, actually, for the transferring the coordinate system, na, to
Huh.
one plane, another coordinate. Sir, actually, you have taken there r y theta actually. So it should be y minus theta, na.
This is what Yogesh also pointed out to me. Well, I mean, as long as you guys are, I'm happy to know that you have found out it found out it has to be r y of minus theta. I have not looked at it correctly, but you know the kind of convention that we are following, and on the basis of that, if you think r y of minus theta is the right one, then so be it. I have no problems with that. Maybe I have made a mistake. I have not revisited that problem again. So again, I will take a look at it and maybe send a group email as to whether it has to be r y of theta or r y of minus theta. And Yogesh said
Sir,
some
I
of you
think
have
it's correct.
which one? R y of theta, is it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Who is this? Is it Yogesh?
No, sir, Rishikesh.
Rishikesh. Okay. Yeah. So one
But-
student at least thinks it's Ry of theta.
So
Also, it
actually,
will be
I too
minus
think
theta.
it's Ry of theta because the R
Sir,
in
I
y
can
axis
explain
is
it
pointed
in
inwards.
the next letter.
Yeah. I mean, these are
No,
small
sir, I
matters.
am also getting Ry of minus theta.
Yes, sir,
Well,
minus theta.
okay, it could be minus theta. I don't know,
So minus
but these are
theta should
small
be
matters.
there.
We will discuss it after the class. Okay, whether it's
Yeah,
Ry of minus theta or Ry of
for
plus theta is a
assignment
very small
purpose.
thing.
Sir, there,
Yes.
sir, then expression, all the expression will be changed, sir, regarding the new Taylor equation, whatever you have written, sir. Even reactions, everything will be changed, sir. If we take
At best, some science will change, but the physics will not change. So
physics will
I
not
will see.
change,
I
sir.
will take a.
That's-
I will take a look at the algebra. The final expressions may change somewhat. I don't know. I will take a look at it. Even they may not change. I'm not sure. I will take a look at it and I'll get back to you guys. But it's. I'll take. Some of you feel it is plus. Some of you feel it is minus. I don't know. I have to take a look at it. But it's a small matter. I will anyway look at it and send a group email about that. Okay. So we'll get started with today's. We'll get started with today's lecture. So any other question, I will take it towards the end of the class. Okay. Already 10:08 now. So I had a couple of announcements to make. The first thing is I have sent an email today morning giving instructions on how to download this Adams software. So the way we do it now is that I had sent a letter to them endorsing all the people who have registered for this course as bona fide students of IISc and requesting them to permit these students to download the software. In response, the team has said that while you register at their website, you also need to upload the PDF of this letter that I had given to them. So this letter not only made this request, but also included a table where all the names of students was mentioned. So that letter therefore also has to be uploaded. And I have sent that letter to all of you. I have attached that letter to my email. So you kindly download that letter, and at the time of registering and downloading the software, please upload this letter because this will be the proof. It will act as an ID card for you. This is especially relevant for new students who have not yet got a formal ID card because they have not yet formally come to campus. So you kindly you kindly upload this letter and download the software. So this is the first announcement. The second announcement has to do with some demos using this software. I assume that earlier I thought we could have this a special class demonstrating the use of this software to you guys sometime on Saturday, this Saturday, another 2 days from now. But we also have the midterm exam on Tuesday. So some of you might consider this to be a distraction because you might want to you might end up spending several hours downloading the software, installing it, and then figuring things out and so on, all of which could probably be better employed in preparing for an exam. That might be the mindset that some of you might end up having. So as a consequence, I have decided that we will not have this demo class this very Saturday. Maybe we can have it in the evening on some of the weekdays, or if that is not possible, we will have it next Saturday. Okay, so that is the second announcement. The third announcement is regarding solutions to homework problems. As I said, Yogesh will conduct a special class, and that class will happen this Saturday. Okay, we can decide on a suitable time. Yogesh, how about the same time, 10 to 11:30, or do you want to do it in the afternoon? Whichever way it is you want to do it, it's fine with me.
Okay, 10:30 will
Sir,
be.
actually we have our midterm on Saturday.
What time?
Sir, it's 9:30 to 12, and then another is thermodynamics which from 2 to 3.
Okay, you can start
Okay,
at
then 12.
3 then.
We can start at 12.
12 is also fine. Yeah. So from 12 to 1:30, probably about 1.5 hours. And the structure of the class would be that Yogesh will not solve every single problem. He will not provide numerical answers or the final solution to any problem either. As I have discussed in the past, we are more interested in the approach that you guys have taken to solve the problems. And it is possible that many of the problems are quite straightforward, and we would simply end up wasting everybody's time in trying to solve every single problem on the board, even to mention all the approaches on the board. So what we would do is, what Yogesh would do is, he would invite questions from you guys. So if there were specific problems where there were confusions, you are not clear about how to solve it, or some such thing, you can ask Yogesh and he will provide the way forward. Okay, he will say how you go about solving it. So that session will happen, and after that session, I'm sure Yogesh would be able to answer most of your questions. But if you still have questions regarding homework problems and you're not able to solve it or some such thing, you are not able to figure out the solution and so on, then you are welcome to send me an email. Okay, sometime either during the weekend or on Monday or some such thing, I will give you an appointment, and then we can have either a if it is a small question, I can answer by email. If it is something lengthy, then we can have a chat over phone, and then I can provide the solutions. I can provide the way forward, discuss how you would go about solving it. So Yogesh will provide solutions to the 4 homeworks. Homeworks 1, 2, 3, and 4, all of which you have returned right now. The homework number 5 is what I have sent recently, and that homework we will not discuss solutions. Okay, but that homework covers all the material up to today's class. So you are expected to. I will not be ruling out the possibility that there would be questions in the midterm that would be picked from this homework. Okay, so that is as far as the homework discussion is concerned. And the last thing is the midterm exam itself. So we would have the midterm exam on Tuesday between 10 to 11:30, and I will probably, the format will be, as of now, I think it will be similar to the homeworks that you guys have solved. The kind of questions that will be asked and so on will be similar. It will be there is no way for me to ensure that this is closed book and closed notes and such other things. So it will be open book and open notes, simply because there is no way for me to ensure or enforce something like that. And Abhimanyu, you had a question.
Sir, can you shift our exam from 10:30, because my exam, fluid mechanics exam, has just ended at 10 a.m.
I know, I understand, but I think there are people with classes at 11:30. Is that right? Are there people with classes at 11:30?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So therefore, Abhimanyu, I cannot do anything. You can start, as I told you over email, you can start the exam 15 minutes late. Okay, 10:15 you can start the exam, and that you can turn in your exam at 11:45. Okay. So for the rest of you, I will be uploading the question paper at around 5 minutes to 10. Okay, just to give you some time to download it, and it will be administered through Microsoft Teams, exactly as we have been administering, the homeworks and such other things. And I would design the paper to be something that you should be able to solve in 1 hour 15 minutes. Okay, so maybe I will have therefore 5 questions, each of which should approximately take about 15 minutes time, and the remaining 15 minutes would be given to you for you to upload to scan and upload your work on Microsoft Teams. Okay, maybe I will think of giving you another 5 minutes grace time, so that you have 20 minutes of time to scan and upload your work. But I am just mentioning to you that the approximate time that I have that I would be planning to hold the exam for is roughly 1 hour 15 minutes, and the remaining 15 minutes is for uploading. So you should be careful, therefore, that you should not end up writing all the way till 11:30, and then the portal will automatically close. Okay, you will not be able to upload your work, because I can set a deadline for accepting your work on Microsoft Teams. So I will set an appropriate deadline, and if you are not able to upload within that deadline, then it becomes more difficult. Now, it is possible that because of internet issues and connectivity issues and so on, you may not be, or power failure or such other things, you may not be able to upload your work on time. In such a case, you can send me by email your answer sheet as early as possible, and give me a justification. as to why you are not able to turn in your exam on time. This is only for special cases, okay? And all along, I make this earnest appeal to all of you. All of you are working from home. All of you are, serious, mature students. You know that it is not possible for us to invigilate or ensure that collaboration and other things do not happen in this exam. For every single rule that we put to avoid collaboration, you can find a loophole to that rule. So I can only appeal to your integrity as human beings to take this exam seriously and not collaborate. Okay, not to have a separate secret WhatsApp group or some such thing among your friends and turn in answers. It is easy to catch answers that are in that 1.5 hours time that you will have. It's very difficult for two people who are copying to write answers very differently. So it's easy for me to catch if that happens. But I don't want to be in that unpleasant of having to talk to people who have collaborated and discuss what kind of penalty to levy on them. Okay, I may end up levying a penalty if I detect the cases of plagiarism or copying, but I don't want to be in that unpleasant situation, and neither would you, I'm sure. Okay, so I appeal to your integrity, therefore, and to not collaborate and to follow this honor system of voluntarily abstaining from collaborating and adhering to the rules of the game. Okay, so with these announcements, let us get started with the technical content of today's class. Let me just share the screen. Can all of you see my white sheet of paper? Hello, can someone unmute and tell me if my paper is visible?
Yes,
okay, thank you. Yeah, so today we will continue on our quest, as we put it, obtaining the multi-body dynamics, obtaining the dynamics of a multi-body system. So Lagrangian formalism, the most important motivation for us to plunge into Lagrangian formalism was to be able to obtain the dynamics of multi-body systems in a simple manner. So it will be curtains to this topic today, dynamics. And in addition, after obtaining the dynamic equations, we need to solve them, right? For as part of direct dynamics, if you are given forces and torques, you need to be able to obtain the joint angles and how they change with time. So how do we go about solving the differential equation that we get when we obtain the dynamics of these multi-body systems? That also we will discuss in today's lecture. Solutions to direct dynamic RECT dynamics problems. Okay, so as part of recap, we note that we started the previous lecture by discussing the advantages of Lagrangian formalism. So in particular, advantages of Lagrangian formalism. So we noted that in the procedure that we adopt to obtain the dynamics of a system, there are two parts. One is the physics part, which pays attention to the kinematic relationships and so on. And then there is a mathematics part where you simply have to take partial derivatives and direct derivatives and so on and so forth. And the Lagrangian formalism has this advantage that the physics part is rather small. It's easy to arrive at. All you have to do is compute the Lagrangian and compute the constraints and the generalized forces, and that's where the physics part ends. And it ends so quickly that we still have energy and time remaining for us to look at the mathematics part and then solve these equations and directly obtain the dynamics of the system. Whereas in the Newton-Euler formulation, as I said, all the recursive relations that we wrote, both forward as well as backward recursions, they were all only physics, right? The forward recursions were for kinematics, the backward recursions were for dynamics. They were just, the backward recursions were simply Newton-Euler equations applied to each single, after writing down the free body diagram of each single rigid body in that multi-body system. We ended up with so many equations that we did not have the energy and the insight to go ahead and solve each of these equations and finally obtain the overall dynamics, as I said, that related only those variables that we could control, namely joint torques, to the variables that change in response to these control variables, namely joint angles and such other things. Okay, so that was the advantage. Then we talked about the Lagrangian for a rigid body, so L for a rigid body, and as far as the potential energy of the rigid body was concerned, it was trivial. We simply replaced the rigid body with a point mass at its center of mass. So V was calculated in a fairly straightforward manner. The kinetic energy, however, was not equivalent to that of simply a point mass at the center of mass of the rigid body. It had a term that was also dependent on the angular velocity. So the kinetic energy, therefore, was of the kind half m magnitude of Vg square plus half omega transpose Ig omega. Okay, so this was the expression for kinetic energy. And when we focused on the kinetic energy expression, we noted that gave us this surprising result, that the principal moments of inertia of a rigid body not only are real numbers but are also positive numbers. So all the three of them are greater than 0. Then we applied the Lagrangian formalism to solve a few problems in rigid body dynamics. To start with, we picked a single rigid body, namely a disk rolling down an incline. And then we extended that to a multi-body system. So we took two rigid bodies, so 2R as it is called, or 2 revolute. So the robotic manipulator that we considered had 2 revolute joints with torques acting at each of those joints. So 2R manipulator dynamics was obtained by us, right? So then, having tasted the success of obtaining the full dynamics of a multi-body system, albeit a relatively simple one, namely the 2R manipulator, we went about the ambitious task of obtaining the dynamics of a multi-body system. So we got started with that. So multi-body dynamics. So with the 2R manipulator itself, we noticed that some of the terms were, hopelessly complicated functions of the generalized coordinates. So our focus, therefore, is not so much to describe in great detail what individual entries of all of these, what the individual terms in the overall dynamics is, but more to show how you go about obtaining the dynamics, what procedure you follow. Once you know the procedure, if you have a problem at hand, you can apply this procedure and obtain it. Okay, that is the way we would go about doing things. Okay, so along the way, when we were discussing multi-body dynamics, we noticed that we considered a general ith rigid body, and we wrote down this ith rigid body, and we wrote down the expressions for potential energy and kinetic energy. So the potential energy expression, which I represent as V subscript I, was equal to minus mg represented in the 0th coordinate transpose times P I, the center of mass location of the ith rigid body. Okay, here is where I want to make one small, I want to request, I want to apologize on a particular matter. When I looked at the notation that I have used for representing the center of mass, I have used multiple notations. So I started off by represent the center of mass with a subscript G. Then somewhere along the way, I change the subscript G to Cm, because Cm stands directly for center of mass. And then I have this PM Cm comma I in some of my previous lectures. And in the last lecture, I put I comma Cm. So I have used three different notations to represent the same single quantity. And for that crime on my part, I want to apologize, because I'm sure it's going to lead to confusion. There is not much that I can do right now, except to point out that I have used these three symbols to represent the same quantity. In future, I want to stick to one symbol. Hopefully, I will be consistent in adhering to it. I shall represent it with the first symbol, G. Okay, so Pg comma I will represent the position of the center of mass of the ith rigid body. Okay, so let us hope that I'm able to stick to it. But I just want to point out that you might come across these things and you might curse me for confusing you. All I can do is apologize for having committed that mistake. Okay, so the expression for potential energy was straightforward. The expression for kinetic energy had, as I said, a linear velocity, a translation velocity component, which was half. This is mi, subscript I, the I, mi. Okay, Vgi. Okay, Vgi transpose Vgi. That is the net kinetic energy associated with translational motion, plus half omega I transpose Igi omega I. Okay, so the total kinetic energy is the sum of each of these things, and the total potential energy is the sum of each of the potential energy expressions. With that, we can define the Lagrangian to be T minus V. But there are two issues that we need to pay attention to in this process. The first is that we don't know the velocities independently. What we know are the joint variables, and we have to first relate the velocities to the rates of change of joint variables. So I may not know the center of mass of the first rigid body, but I will know the rate at which that first revolute joint is rotating, because that's where I have my motor and that's where I have my sensors. Okay, same is true for other joints also. All my instrumentation in terms of actuation and sensing are at the joints, and we have also very appropriately chosen the joint variables as our generalized coordinates. So the first thing we need to do before we deploy our Euler-Lagrange machinery is to represent each of these terms in the Lagrangian not in terms of simply linear velocities and angular velocities, but in terms of generalized coordinates, namely the joint variables and their rates of change. So that is one project that we need to undertake. The second project is the project of simplifying the appearance of the final expression. Okay, we understand that there will be lots of these things, and we are also allergic to looking at very lengthy expressions. They scare us, they confuse us. So can we package away the complexity and represent the expressions for kinetic energy and so on in a very compact manner? Okay, so that is the second project that we will undertake before deploying the Euler-Lagrange machinery at obtaining the equations of motion. Okay, so let us take the second project first, how to make the appearance of kinetic energy more simple to see. Okay, so we have this expression. Let us take this particular mass. What is Ti? It's half mi times Vi transpose Vi is the sum of the squares of the x and y and z components of velocity. So Vg x comma I square plus Vg y comma I square plus Vg I comma z square. Right? So these are all scalars, whereas that is a vector. Okay. Unfortunately, when I write it is hard to differentiate the two. Maybe I'm putting an arrowhead on top of the vector quantities to show that that is a vector. And Vgx, Vgy, Vgz are its x, y, and z components. So the kinetic energy is the sum of the squares of its x, y, and z components multiplied with mass. Okay, this is the expression. Notice that in my quest for simplicity, I can write this expression as the kinetic energy Ti, just the translational part alone, as Vgx, Vgy, Vgz of the ith rigid body times M, a diagonal matrix with M along its diagonals, Mi along its diagonals, times Vgx, Vgy, Vgz of the ith rigid body. Okay, this product is going to give me the same quantity, half of M times Mi times that the sum of the squares of x, y, and z components as before. Okay. Why have I done this? There's a half also here. By doing this, I am casting it in a form that is similar to the angular velocity expression, right? So I can write it as basically Vg transpose mass Mi times I 3/3 times Vg, right? And this is similar in structure to omega transpose the inertia matrix Ig times omega. Okay, so the total kinetic energy will be the sum of these two things. Okay, so that simplification I can that rearrangement I can undertake. Then I can do one more simplification for the kinetic energy of that first thing. I can now concatenate. I can put these two, the angular velocity vector and the linear velocity vector, together to form one longer vector. So this is Vgx, Vgy, Vgz, omega x, omega y, omega z. Okay, I put them all together and I can write the kinetic energy as this term here, Mi, Mi, Mi. So there's a 3/3 matrix. Okay, and then there will be zeros everywhere else, and then there will be an Ig matrix here, and that multiplies another 6/1 vector, which is Vgxi. I have to have the subscript I everywhere. I apologize again for this notations which we have to carry forward. Okay, Vgyi, Vgzi, omega xi, omega yi, omega zi. Okay, I can now write it in this particular manner, right? So now, any questions about this? Has to be a half also. Any questions about this expression? Okay, now I define a new vector. Okay, I'll call that as capital Ui. Okay, which is the vector of vector comprising both linear velocity and angular velocity. Okay, note that the units of the elements of this vector are not the same. For the first three elements, it is meters per second. For the other three elements, it's radians per second. But there's nothing preventing me from making a vector out of all of these things. And this is where the power and the generality of linear algebra comes into play. Okay, so therefore I can write the kinetic energy as half of Ui transpose, and then there is a matrix here with off diagonal entries being 3/3 0 matrices. Okay, and then there is a diagonal matrix with the mass Mi along the diagonal, and then there is an inertia matrix which is not necessarily diagonal, but it's a symmetric matrix. So that's there, and I call that overall matrix is a 6/6 matrix, right? Because Ui is a 6/1 vector, and this is a 1/6 vector, is a 6/6 matrix. When I multiply everything, I get a scalar, namely the kinetic energy. Ui transpose M0I. I call this capital M0I Ui. Okay. Now compare how much simplification there has been in the expression. Okay, in relation to what we had earlier. Okay, you had two separate terms. There were so many symbols for you to remember. Okay, mass and velocity, translational velocity, angular velocity, inertia matrix, and so on. So at least 4 symbols you have to remember. Now you have only 2 symbols. It has been reduced to only 2 symbols, ui and m0i, and all the complexity of inertia matrix and mass and etc. have been packaged away. Definition of these quantities. Okay, so we have therefore greatly simplified the appearance of kinetic energy for one of these rigid bodies. Okay, but unfortunately our job is not done yet. We have n of these rigid bodies, and that gives us the total kinetic energy. So I goes from 1 to n. Okay, so although I have succeeded partially in simplifying the expression for rigid body by appealing to a new definition of a velocity vector along the lines that I showed earlier, I still have to deal with many such terms. Okay, so I want an even simpler expression for the kinetic energy. So to do that, I notice that this expression half of u1 m01 u1 transpose m01 u1 plus u2 transpose m02 u2 etc. etc. can be written as another vector, namely u1 transpose u2 transpose etc. etc. up to un transpose times a matrix m01, which is 6 by 6 matrix, and then another matrix m02, another 6 by 6 matrix, and 0 all the way up to m0n. Okay, and then I will have a column vector here, which is u1, u2, all the way up to un. Okay, I can represent the total kinetic energy in this particular form. Okay, what is the dimension of all of these things? So u1 has a dimension of 6 by 1, and I'm putting all these tall 6 by 1 matrices one on top of another, all 6 by 1 vectors one on top of another. So the dimension of this will be 6n by 1, right? And what about the dimension of this matrix here? It has these blocks, these mass matrices blocks along the diagonal, and the other entries will be 0 blocks. So there will be a 6 by 6 0 here. There will be n minus 1 6 by 6 0 matrices here. Similarly, in every single row. Okay, only one of the 6 by 6 matrix blocks will be non-zero, and they will be the those mass and inertia elements of that particular rigid body. The dimension of this will be 6n by 6n, and this one here will be 1 by 6n. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So with this, I now define a further package away the complexity further by defining u to be the vector of velocities u1, u2, etc. up to un. Okay, so that I get my kinetic energy to be equal to half u transpose, and there is this m not 1 m etc. etc. up to m not n, right? That 6n by 6n matrix. I will define that as an m naught matrix, a single m naught matrix. Okay, and that therefore will go here, and my kinetic energy will be u transpose m naught u for the overall interconnection of rigid bodies. Any questions? I think at this point it is fair to pause and admire the genius of vectors and matrices. What looked hopelessly complicated with lots of indices and so on could be shortened to one single short equation. You have to now remember only 2 symbols, m naught and u. You have packaged away the rest of the complexity in the definitions of what u capital U stands for, what capital M naught stands for, and so on and so forth. Okay, so to the eye, it is visually very appealing, and it tells us exactly what we need to pay attention to, okay, at a global level, and not get lost in all the indices and the summations and the products and so on and so forth, if we would otherwise do if we did not have this machinery available to us. Okay, so we have the expression for kinetic energy, but as I said, each of the elements of this u vector are in general dependent on the joint variables, which essentially have been chosen to be the generalized coordinates. Okay, so we have to next express each of these terms U, capital, each of the elements of capital U in terms of joint variables. Now, if I were to do it just as it is, I can go ahead and do it at a general level. I think you guys would lose me. You know, it will become very abstract and you will not have any feel for what I am doing. So instead of doing that, what I intend to do is to frequently go back to that one example of a multi-body system that we have solved and try to draw parallels or try to give the expressions for the terms that I would be talking about in connection with that specific concrete example. Okay, so that you know what I am talking about. Okay, so if you start with, we need to express capital U in terms of, you know, the joint variables. Let us take that problem that we already solved. What is capital U for the problem that we already solved for the 2R manipulator? For a general, you know, three-dimensional mechanism, you would have all three components for angular velocity, all three components for linear velocity, etc., etc. But here we are dealing only with, you know, planar motion. So you would only have two components for linear velocity and one component for angular velocity. So capital U therefore will be of the form U1, U2. Let me first break that down. The, you know, the velocity vectors for the two links, and that U1 itself, you know, as we said, it will be the translational velocity and angular velocity. So it will be V1x, V2x, and then omega 1x. Okay, and then U2 will be, you know, again V2x. Sorry, V1x, V1y, omega 1y. I'm sorry, and this one will be V2x, V2y, and then omega 2. Not omega 1x and omega 1y. They're all along the z-axis. So omega 1, we'll simply call them as omega 1 and omega 2. This will be the structure of the, you know, that overall velocity vector for the case of the 2R manipulator. Any questions about this? Okay. Now, if you know, how do you calculate V1x and V2x? If you know the position vectors of that first link, you differentiate it and obtain V1x and V2x. So if you go back to that problem, the first rigid body had a length L1, and the center of mass Pg was equal to Pg1, Pg comma 1. What was it equal to? The x component was L1 cosine theta 1. The y component was L1 sine theta 1. Right? So the derivative of this Pg1 dot was the velocity vector, which was V1x, V2x, and I got that by differentiating this. So it's L minus L1 sine theta 1 dot minus L1 cos, sorry, plus L1 cos theta 1 dot. Okay, so do you agree with me therefore that I can write V1x, V2x as minus L1 sine theta 1 plus L1 cos theta 1 dot? So I can therefore express the velocities, the leading translational velocities in terms of the joint variable, which is going to be my you know, joint variable and its time derivative. Okay. I can do a similar thing also for angular velocity. What is omega 1? Omega 1 was directly equal to theta 1 dot. Right. Therefore, they have the first vector V1x, V2x, omega 1. Sorry, V1x, V1y, omega 1. That first vector, which we called as U1, to be equal to minus L sine theta 1, L cos theta 1, and 1 times theta 1 dot. Right. Similarly, I can undertake you know, the same kind of you know, mathematics for the other the linear translational velocity and angular velocity of the second rigid link also. I don't want to do the steps, but I will write down the final expression for that particular case. So V1x, V1y, omega 1, V2x, v2y omega 2. This is our overall vector u that we are talking about for the 2R manipulator, and that is related to, there are only two joint variables here, theta 1 dot and theta, there are only two generalized coordinates, theta 1 and theta 2. So the velocities will be related to the rates of change by means of an appropriate matrix. Okay, this will be a huge, this is a 6 by 1 vector. So this will be a 6 by 2 matrix, and this is a 2 by 1 vector. Okay, we already had the expression for the first term. So this minus L1 sine theta 1, that multiplies theta 1 dot, and 0 multiplies theta 2 dot. When I do this, I get V1x. Okay, for V1y, I will get L1 cos theta 1 times theta 1 dot plus 0 times theta 2 dot. Okay, for omega 1, I will get 1 times theta 1 dot plus 0 times theta 2 dot. Okay, and I can do that for also the other, for the other two terms, and I'll just write down the expressions here. It's minus of L1 sine theta 1 plus L2 by 2 sine theta 1 plus theta 2. That will be the other entry here, and then minus L2 by 2 sine theta 1 plus theta 2 will be the entry multiplying theta 2 dot. Okay, I have written it in a very illegible manner because the expression is already there somewhere, and I have unfortunately chosen my bracket to be very narrow, so I'm not able to squeeze in all these symbols in this narrow space, etc., etc. I'll not write down the other terms, or maybe I will write it down for the sake of completeness. L1 cos theta 1 plus L2 by 2 cos theta 1 plus theta 2 plus L2 by 2 cos theta 1 plus theta 2. Okay, that is the fourth term. And what is omega 2? Omega 2 is theta 1 dot plus theta 2 dot. So I would have 1 and 1 as the other entries here. Okay, so you see that therefore this matrix here relates the joint variables to the linear and angular velocities of the two rigid bodies. Okay, so this is how I go about doing it even in case of the general n rigid body problem. So for each center of mass, the center of mass of any general rigid body Pg comma I will be a function of all the joint variables before that, theta 1, theta 2, etc., all the way up to theta I. Okay, so the velocity therefore Vgi will be equal to delta partial of f with respect to partial of theta 1 times theta 1 dot plus partial of f with respect to partial theta 2 dot, etc., and so on and so forth. Okay, that's exactly what we have done here also to obtain the expression for the 2R manipulator. And I put all these together, I can write similar expressions also for angular velocity. The orientation of the ith frame is dependent on all these joint variables, the rotation matrix relating the ith coordinate frame to the original frame. And the angular velocity will be the rotation matrix dot times its inverse, and the rotation matrix dot will therefore can then by using chain rule be expressed in terms of theta 1 dot, theta 2 dot, and so on and so forth. And from that you can obtain the angular velocity vector. Once you have the angular velocity matrix, from that you can get the angular velocity vector as functions of again theta 1 dot, theta 2 dot, and all of that. And I've already done that for the case of the 2R manipulator here. Okay, so if you do, you can do this essentially for the general case as well. I shall call this matrix as J. Okay, there's a special significance for this matrix in mathematics. It's called as a Jacobian. So I can derive it more generally starting from the these kinds of expressions. Starting from Pgi is equal to f of something and so on and so forth, and obtain the structure of the Jacobian. I don't want to do that because that is not the point of this whole discussion here. Suffice it to say that there is a way to obtain the dependence of velocities on the rates of change of generalized coordinates. Okay, and that is obtained by means of this. That is, the two are related by means of a matrix, and that matrix is called as a Jacobian. So more generally, therefore, if I have U as my overall vector for a n multi-body system, I can write that as J times Q dot. Okay, where Q is the vector of all of my generalized coordinates, Q1, Q2, etc. up to Qn. Okay, in the specific example of the 2R manipulator, my Q vector comprised of only two elements, namely θ1 and θ2. In case of the general manipulator, we discussed, right, in the previous lecture, the first could be a revolute joint, the second could be a prismatic joint. Depending on that, there is a certain joint variable associated with that. The vector of joint variables is Q. Okay, and the rates of change represent Q dot. I can write U as J times Q dot. Okay, any questions about this representation? I'm hoping that the concrete example that I took of the 2R manipulator was convincing enough for you to imagine how the structure would be for the J matrix. Okay, what is the dimension of the J matrix, by the way? See, what is the size of this U vector? As I discussed, it is 6n by 1. It's a huge, tall column vector. And Q, for a n joint mechanism, I will have n degrees of freedom. Okay, so for a serial kinematic mechanism, I'll have n degrees of freedom. So this is a 6 by 1 vector. Okay, so therefore, this J matrix has to be equal to a 6n by 6 matrix. Right? So that is what is necessary. So this is in general not a square matrix. It's a rectangular matrix. Okay. So now that I know how to represent the velocity in terms of the rates of change of generalized coordinates, I can come back to my kinetic energy, which is T equal to half U transpose m naught U, and I can write that as half of U transpose. I can write U as J times Q dot transpose m naught times J times Q dot. Okay, which is half of Q dot transpose J transpose m naught J Q dot. Okay, now again I define this J transpose m naught times J as a new mass matrix M. Okay, and therefore write this as half of Q dot transpose m Q dot. Okay, this again is another huge success in terms of simplicity in representation. You see, I have again packaged away the complexity and come up with an equally simple expression for kinetic energy in terms of joint velocities, as this is called, in terms of the rates of change of generalized coordinates instead of rates of change of Cartesian coordinates. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, there are no questions. So the potential energy, we had already written down the expression. Unfortunately, that cannot be simplified any further. So the potential energy V is summation of the potential energies of each of the individual rigid bodies. That is dependent on the height of the centers of mass of each of those rigid bodies from the datum that we pick for defining our potential energy. Okay, so with this, the physics of the problem is complete. Okay, we have come up with an expression for, so Vi, okay, before I do that, as I said, Vi is sigma mi G0 transpose minus of that with the PGI, right? So at PGI, the position of the center of mass of that ith rigid body will be a function again of the joint variables, right? So it will be a function of Q1, Q2 all the way to Qn. So that also is a function of some vector Q. Okay, so I have the potential energy as a function of the generalized coordinates, or the kinetic energy as a function of the generalized coordinates. With that, I'm ready to send my Lagrangian through the machinery of Euler-Lagrange equations and obtain the dynamics of our multi-body system. And again, I shall skip the algebra associated with that. That's not very important. What is important is the final result. Okay, because that showcases the power of this technique, or the ability of this technique to handle a problem as complicated as that of a general multi-body dynamics 1 and yet obtain the equations of motion. I shall directly write down the equation of motion here. It will be of the kind m times q double dot, okay, plus c of q comma q dot. C is a function of q and q dot times q dot plus g of q is equal to the vector of generalized forces. I shall call that as tau. Okay, where tau is a vector of generalized forces. It could be tau 1. Okay, and the first link was first joint was a revolute joint in our assumption. So there will be a joint torque associated with a generalized coordinate. The second joint we assumed was a prismatic joint. So the generalized force is actually a force. Okay, so F2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this will be the on the right hand side. This is a vector of generalized forces acting on the system, and with that, the derivation of the multi-body dynamics of the derivation of dynamics of a multi-body system comes to an end. Okay. Now, again, to build some familiarity with each of these terms, let us look at how the structure was for the 2R manipulator. Okay, I had the structure for the 2R manipulator earlier. I'm showing it again right now. So you see that there was a term that multiplied theta 1 double dot and theta 2 double dot, and that we called as a mass matrix. And that's precisely the mass matrix M that we are talking of here. Okay, so you notice that although we call it as a mass matrix, it is also a function of geometric parameters. There is L1 coming here, there is theta 2, theta 1 coming everywhere, theta 2 alone here in this particular example. You could also have the other joint variable also coming in some other situation, some other configuration. So therefore, in general, the mass matrix M is not a constant matrix. It's a function of the joint function of the generalized coordinates. Okay, you notice that the mass matrix doesn't have any of the rates of change of generalized coordinates. You don't have theta 2 dot, you don't have theta 1 dot. Such terms do not appear in the mass matrix. It only is a function of the generalized coordinates, theta 2, theta 1, and so on. Okay, so M of Q is in general a function only of the generalized coordinates and is not a constant matrix. Okay, because when we say mass, we think of something that's a material property, that's an attribute to the rigid body. Here, this mass matrix is it's called a mass matrix because it multiplies an acceleration term here. Otherwise, it is a function of geometry. It's a function of the lengths of the rigid bodies and the angles between them. Okay, so this is a mass matrix. And then this C of Q comma Q dot. If you come back to the example, the concrete example of a 2R manipulator, if you see I have theta 1 dot square at the bottom and theta 1 dot, theta 2 dot plus theta 2 dot square at the top, I can write this as some matrix times theta 1 dot and theta 2 dot. Okay, and that matrix is essentially going to be this matrix C. And again, this entire term arises because of Coriolis and centripetal accelerations. Okay, and the last term is G of Q, right? And that is basically G of Q is basically the partial derivative of the potential energy V with respect to Q. So this represents basically a vector. Okay, delta V by delta Q1 will be the first term, delta V by delta Q2 will be a second term, and so on and so forth. Okay, minus of that because in the definition of the Lagrangian you have T minus V. So to be consistent with the sign, it has to be minus of this. Okay, and that, if you look at this here, is for the concrete example of a 2R manipulator, you will have these. These are again only dependent on geometry. You have theta 1, theta 2 alone. You don't have theta 1 dot and theta 2 dot. And we also discussed how this torque due to gravity has a physical significance. These are terms that are related to the moment applied by the gravity force acting on that particular rigid body at the location of that ith joint. Okay, so that is the last term, and then tau is the vector of generalized forces, and here we had two torques, the joint torque at the joint 1 and joint torque at the joint 2. That was that vector tau. And if you have a prismatic joint, the second entry will not be a torque, but it will be a force. So as it is in this particular case. Okay. So we have therefore breathed some life into this equation. Any questions so far? Okay. So before we go about solving this equation, just a couple of comments are in order. Okay. If you go back to the example of that 2R manipulator, if you looked at the mass matrix, you see that it's a symmetric matrix. If you look at the off-diagonal terms, they're identical. Okay. So is that generally true? Can we show that M of Q is in general a symmetric matrix? Well, it turns out that it is possible, because what is the definition of M of Q? It is J transpose M naught J. And what is this M naught matrix? M naught matrix is essentially this stringing together of all the mass matrices M naught 1, M naught 2, M naught 3, etc. And each of those matrices in turn is an identity matrix with the mass multiplying that identity matrix and the inertia matrix of that particular rigid body. So each of those M naught 1, M naught 2, etc. are all symmetric matrices. So this overall matrix M naught is therefore also a symmetric matrix, right? So this is symmetric by definition because of the way you have defined that. Okay. So what is M of Q transpose? Okay. It is going to be equal to J transpose M naught J whole transpose. So transpose of a product is a product of the transposes, okay, but in the reverse order, right? So this is going to be equal to J transpose M naught transpose J transpose whole transpose, and that's going to be equal to J transpose M naught transpose is equal to M naught, because this matrix, is a symmetric matrix times J. So you see that M transpose of Q is also equal to M of Q. So M mass matrix is always a symmetric matrix. Okay. Now it turns out also that mass matrix is not only symmetric, it's also always invertible. Okay, you can always it's never singular. Okay, the way you obtain that is by noting that the mass matrix multiplied with the joint velocities or the rates of change of generalized coordinates, half of that is the kinetic energy. Okay, so when any one of these terms is non-zero, if any one of the entries of Q dot is non-zero, the kinetic energy will also be non-zero. There is never a value of Q dot for which the kinetic energy becomes zero. Okay, and as a consequence, I don't want to get into the mathematics of it. This is called as a positive definite matrix. Okay, if M of Q is a positive definite matrix, then Q dot transpose M times Q dot will always be a positive number, and a kinetic energy is always a positive number. Okay, as a consequence, therefore, M of Q is a positive definite matrix. And positive definite matrices have this property that their eigenvalues are always positive. Okay, and they are never zero. And if eigenvalues are never zero, then the matrix is always invertible. Okay, so that's the argument. I have presented in a very brief manner because I did not want it to be a major thing. I just wanted to mention in passing that M of Q is always invertible. Okay, so that is the first comment that I wanted to make, that M of Q is symmetric and is also invertible. What is the Coriolis expression? The second comment. What is the expression for CQ and Q dot? It turns out that the expression for that is, the Ij component. I'll just write down Cij. Okay, the I is equal to half sigma over k. It looks very complicated, but that's what it is. Partial of mij divided by partial of qk. Sorry, partial of mij with respect to qk plus partial of mik with respect to qj minus partial of mkj with respect to qk. This whole thing multiplied by qk dot. Okay, it takes some time to understand this expression at some level. And I am not devoting that time here because it is not relevant to our main point here. The main point, as I said, was that with the Euler-Lagrange formalism, we can obtain the overall dynamics of a multi-body system. Okay, what the expressions for M is and C is and so on are all the details. They're all trivial details which can be worked out if we have the patience to do that. There's nothing very significant about that. The significant thing is we can express it in this form. And again, I want you to pause for a few minutes and silently thank the machinery of vectors and matrices because of the elegance with which we can write down the multi-body dynamics equation as a consequence of using vectors and matrices. This how many equations this is? There are n generalized coordinates, right? So q double dot is therefore a n by 1 vector, and m of q is a n by n matrix. Okay, so all these are n by 1 vector and n by n matrix, and g of q is an n by 1 vector, and tau is also an n by 1 vector. Okay, so you have to first thank Lagrangian formalism in getting rid of all these joint forces and so on, and replacing a 6n by 1 vector, right, of Cartesian velocities and angular velocities with a n by 1 vector of just the joint velocities or the generalized velocities. That's the first thing that we need to give thanks to. Then the second thing that we need to give thanks to is the machinery of vectors and matrices, which allows us to package away complexity. We can just make a vector of each of these generalized coordinates, call that vector as q, and then write a single equation in that vector, okay, and its derivatives with respect to time. Okay, so I want you to therefore pause for a moment and admire the compactness and the elegance of the appearance of the multi-body dynamics equation. You would have imagined a very messy, complicated looking equation in terms of q1, q2, etc., but this particular notation allows us to make it look very simple. Okay, so the next challenge, having come this far, the next challenge is to solve the problem of direct dynamics. Okay, given the joint torques, given the generalized forces that are acting on your serial kinematic mechanism, obtain the rates of change of the generalized coordinates and the generalized coordinates themselves. That is the challenge of solving this particular differential equation. Okay, before we get to that, are there any questions about what we have discussed so far? Okay, so there are no questions. So how do we solve this differential equation? M of q times q double dot plus c of q comma q dot times q dot plus g of q is equal to tau. How do we solve this? First, what is the nature of this equation? It is not very easy to see in this particular example. So let us take a very simple example where this is where this can be applied, and that is a case of a pendulum. Okay, so the joint angle q is theta, and there's a point mass m, and we know that the equation of motion will be theta double dot plus g by L sine theta is equal to tau, if tau is a torque that I'm applying at the revolute joint. What kind of an equation is this? It's a second order equation, second order differential equation, ordinary differential equation. It's also time invariant in the sense that the coefficients of theta and other things are not changing with time. Okay, so the second order, okay, ordinary time invariant, and on the right hand side I have a forcing torque, right? So this equation is what is known as an inhomogeneous differential equation. If I had 0 on the right hand side, it would be called a homogeneous differential equation, but now it's an inhomogeneous differential equation. Okay, so there are all these labels that it satisfies. Okay, on top of all of this, if this was not lengthy enough to describe the nature of this differential equation, there is also the fact that this is not what is known as a linear differential equation. So if a differential equation is linear, so the input I'm giving is tau, and the output which I'm trying to calculate is theta. If the differential equation was linear, if I were to scale the input, the output, the response should also scale by the same factor. Okay, if I double the input, the response should also double. Likewise, if I apply two different inputs, tau 1 and tau 2, then, and theta 1 and theta 2 are the responses to these two inputs, then when I apply the sum of the two inputs, tau 1 plus tau 2, the response should be equal to theta 1 plus theta 2. Okay, this is the first property is called homogeneity. The second property is called superposition. So both these properties have to be satisfied for this to be a linear differential equation. Is it satisfied in this particular case? A simple examination will reveal to you that it is not satisfied, right? Because if I make k times tau, if I provide k times tau, then I'll have on the right hand side to be equal to k times theta 1 double dot plus g by L sine theta. Okay, and that is k times theta 1 double dot plus k times g by L sine theta. So the response will not be k times theta. If the response was actually k times theta, then on the left hand side I should have had k times theta double dot plus g by L sine of k theta. Sine of k theta is not equal to k times sine of theta, right? So the equation is therefore, in addition to being all of these, it's also a non-linear differential equation. Second order non-linear ordinary time invariant inhomogeneous differential equation. Okay, that non-linearity is also evident in the expression here. You have m of q multiplying q double dot and q, and you have q dot multiplying q dot here. So you have terms like q dot square and so on when you expand them out. So all those terms make this equation anyway non-linear. And but the formal definition for linear differential equation is based on homogeneity and superposition, and that also we can see by inspection. For even this very simple case of a pendulum, it is not satisfied. Okay, so it is not a linear time invariant differential equation. Now it turns out that you don't have closed form solutions, or in other words, you cannot write out directly the expression for q of t for a nonlinear differential equation. Okay, so q of t in general cannot be obtained in closed form for a nonlinear ODE, ordinary differential equation. Okay, in general, and even for this very specific case of a pendulum, theta double dot plus g by L sine theta is equal to tau, it is not possible to obtain the solution. Okay, it involves elliptic integrals and so on and so forth, and you don't have a closed form solution even for this problem. Okay, but then you might say, well, pendulum, is it not a very common example of a simple harmonic oscillator? So don't we have a solution for simple harmonic oscillator, that the motion is a sinusoidal one? Well, the pendulum's equation is a simple harmonic oscillator only for small angles. So when the angle is very small, I can replace sine theta with theta. Okay, in which case I will have this equation to be theta double dot plus g by L theta is equal to tau. Now that, it turns out, becomes a linear equation. And for a linear equation, you have closed form expressions for solution. Okay, but for the actual problem where theta is not assumed to be small, even the problem as simple as that of a pendulum doesn't have a closed form solution. Okay, so therefore we are in a soup. The only way forward is to come up with numerical solutions to this differential equation, to this particular differential equation. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Now, since we have to obtain numerical solution to this differential equation, we have to approach the mathematicians. We have to go to the mathematicians and ask them, look, I have this particular differential equation. It's a vector differential equation. There are n differential equations which are interconnected in a very hopelessly complicated manner. Of course, my notations are deceptive in that they package away all the complexity. When I write them all out, it will make anybody's head spin. Okay, so I have the differential equation. I want to numerically solve the differential equation. How do I do it? Okay, to which the mathematician to whom you have approached would probably say, well, I don't have a solution to this particular differential equation, equations of this particular structure, but I can tell you how to numerically solve differential equations which are of this kind. X dot is equal to f of x comma t, where x is a vector and f is also a vector. Okay, so that mathematician would tell you, well, if you if you can cast your problem in this particular form, then I can solve this problem, not otherwise. Now you look at this equation that a mathematician has claimed to know how to solve numerically, and you think there is nothing connecting that structure to the structure that I have for my original differential equation. This is a second order differential equation. That one there is a first order differential equation, and it looks so small and compact, right? So whereas I have three terms here, I have something on the right hand side. Here, none of that is there. So at the outset, as an engineer, I'm not able to see how this mathematician's knowledge can benefit me in any particular way. Okay, but that's where looks can be deceptive. So it turns out that this particular form to which the mathematician can tell you the way forward is adequately general for it to also take down a problem that is vastly more complicated in appearance, such as the dynamics of a multi-body system. How do we see that? First, before we talk about how to cast it in that form, you need to note that although this looks very innocuous, this equation, this is an n by 1 vector or whatever, that may also be an n by 1 vector. Okay, although it looks innocuous, this can be extremely complicated. Okay, for example, f x comma t, what can that form be? Okay, let us take one simple example. X can be a vector, right? So let us take just a 2 by 1 vector, x1 dot, x2 dot. Okay, I can have x1 dot to be equal to x2 cube, x1 plus x3, plus something else, 2 times x2 or whatever. Plus, I can also have a forcing term. I can also have tau in it. Okay, why can I have it? Because tau is an independent variable which is a function of time. Okay, and x2 dot can be another equation which is not at all connected with the first equation. I can have some x1 power 5 times x2 to the power 4 plus whatever other thing, sine of x1 plus 3x2, whatever I want I can have here. So you see therefore that although this equation here x dot is equal to f of x comma t looks ridiculously simple in appearance, when I look at the true possibilities of the kind of equations I can represent with this notation, the possibilities are practically endless. Okay, this is just for n is equal to 2, right? I can have any number of more columns, any number of more entries in the column vector of x, and have correspondingly significantly more sophisticated terms on the right hand side. Okay, so that is the first point to note in this particular case. Although this looks simple in its appearance, the kind of functions that I can have are limitless or endless, and the rows need not be related to one another. I can, for example, have the first row not have any term in x2. I can only have x1. Okay, the second row can only have x2 or can only have something else, x1 plus x2. So the combinations and possibilities are limitless. And I can also have forcing, as I said. I can have generalized forces also, tau1 and tau2 and so on, as part of my right-hand side expression. So clearly, therefore, I can represent nonlinear differential equations in this compact form, provided they are of the first order. Okay, so I can see that the nonlinearity of my problem is not an issue as far as this representation is concerned. Our mathematicians can solve nonlinear problems of arbitrary complexity, but provided they are a first order differential equations. They're first order vector differential equations. And that is my next challenge. And in fact, the only remaining challenge. I need to somehow represent my second order vector differential equation as a first order vector differential equation. Okay, if I'm able to do that, then that one technique that a mathematician, the one set of family of differential equations to which mathematicians have numerical solutions become accessible to me, and I can use them for solving my problem. Okay, so the second part is what I would be discussing: how to convert a second order differential equation to a first order differential equation. Okay, let us come back to this simple case of a pendulum. Theta double dot plus g by L sine theta is equal to tau. Okay. Now, there's a very ingenious transformation that helps you to do that. I define x1 as theta and x2 as x1 dot, which is theta dot. Okay. Then I notice that x2 dot is nothing but theta double dot. Let me write this equation, therefore, in terms of x2 and x1 and so on. What is theta double dot? It is x2 dot, right? And what is sine theta? Sine of x1 is equal to tau, right? Or in other words, x2 dot is equal to tau minus g by L sine x1. And I also already have that x1 dot is equal to x2. So now I put these two things together and I write x1 dot x2 dot is equal to x2 and tau minus g by L sine x1. Okay. Now I define my left hand side as a new vector x. Okay. And I notice that it's of the form x dot is equal to f of x comma t, exactly as exactly in the form that the mathematician wanted it to be, right? Where this f of x comma t is whatever I have, this vector that I have on the right hand side. It has only x2 in the first row, and it has the forcing term, which is a function of time, tau, there. And if it's a constant, it's a constant. That function of time will be a constant function. That's it. And then there is a function of x1 also. There's no function of x2 in the second row. There's no function of x1 in the first row. But that's okay. Our f can, is the definition of f is general enough to admit this kind of a structure. So you see, therefore, that for this simple case of a scalar differential equation, where only one equation exists and theta is a scalar quantity, I could convert the second order differential equation to a first order vector differential equation, right? Now, can I do the same thing for my original vector differential equation? I had m q double dot plus c of q comma q dot times q dot plus g of q is equal to tau. Can I do the same thing for that? To do that, we follow the same steps. We shall define x1 as the vector of generalized coordinates q, and x2 as x1 dot, which is therefore going to be equal to q dot. Okay, and x2 dot therefore will be equal to q double dot. Therefore, in terms of x1 and x2, this will become m of x1 times x2 dot plus c of x1 comma x2 times x2 plus g of x1 is equal to tau. And then I have the original equation, x1 dot is equal to x2, right? So I can put these two together. I'll write x1 dot x2 dot is equal to x2, and from the equation here, x2 dot is equal to tau minus g of x1 minus c of x1 comma x2 times x2. Whole thing is multiplied with the mass inverse of the mass matrix, M inverse. Okay. Notice that mass matrix is always invertible, so I can always define M inverse without any problems. Okay. Now I define this new vector x1 dot x2 dot as the vector x, and this on the right hand side I have a function which is basically a function of the entries x1 and x2, and also function of time because I have that forcing function tau here. Okay. So this therefore satisfies the requirements that a mathematician has imposed for me to use the tools that they have at their disposal. Okay. So having cast it in this particular form, I now go back to the mathematician. I tell him or her that I have cast now my second order nonlinear differential equation in the form that you wanted, a first order vector differential equation. Now please tell me how I can solve this numerically. And what the mathematician would say, what he or she would recommend is what is known as a Runge-Kutta scheme. Okay. I don't know if you guys have come across, if you have learned Runge-Kutta scheme in one of your other courses. Have you? Can one of you answer? Have you come across Runge-Kutta scheme?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, sir. I have.
Okay. Okay, good. So I will just write down the scheme and then have a few concluding remarks in relation to the scheme, and then we will be done. Okay. So the most common form of the Runge-Kutta, by the way, is a family of solution techniques. It was developed by these German mathematicians, Runge and Kutta. Runge-Kutta scheme for solving x dot is equal to f of x comma t. Okay. So given this equation and you choose a certain time step, okay, as a you want to obtain x as a function of t, right, where x is that vector. So you divide up the time into tiny increments. Let each increment be h units in length. Okay. So you evaluate x, you obtain x at x of 0, then x of h, x of 2h, and so on and so forth. So at some discrete intervals of time, you obtain the solution all the way to nh. So whatever time you want, you divide it up into tiny increments of h units. Okay. Then the Runge-Kutta scheme goes this way. You first compute these terms. K1 is equal to h times f of xn tn. So to compute the n plus 1th solution at the n plus 1th time, given the solution at the nth time, this is how you do it. Compute this, then K2 is equal to h times f of xn plus k1 by 2 tn plus h by 2. Then another term K3 equal to h times f of xn plus k2 by 2 tn plus h by 2. Then K4, another term, h times f of xn plus k3 comma tn plus h. Then your solution is given by at the n plus 1 step, x of n plus 1. This is a recursive, this is a forward recursive solution. Okay, is equal to xn plus 1 by 6 of k1 plus 2k2 plus 2k3 plus k4, and then there will be terms on the order of h power 5. Okay, so this is the Runge-Kutta algorithm. Now you might wonder where all and why am I getting k1 by 2 here and h by 2 here and only k3 there and only h here, and why am I having 1 by 6 here, why am I having 2 here? All these answers are provided by mathematicians. So when you do a Taylor series expansion and approximate them, it turns out that these coefficients are the ones that give you the correct results. I don't have the time to get into that. Okay, that's outside the scope of this lecture. If you're interested, we can talk about it some other time. But there is a logic behind all of this. Okay, if you follow this algorithm, the goal is to point out that it's possible to numerically solve our dynamic equation. The forward dynamics is amenable to numerical solution. And the way you do it is by using Runge-Kutta technique, and this is called as a fourth order Runge-Kutta technique. It's called fourth order because there are these four things that you define. Okay, you have second order techniques, you have the first order technique also. In the first order technique, you just have xn plus 1 is equal to xn plus h times f of xn comma tn. Okay, this is also called as Euler's technique, Euler's method. And in the most simple case, namely for the first order, Runge-Kutta's first order method simply reduces to Euler method. But Runge-Kutta technique can be generalized. You can have second order, third order, fourth order, fifth order, sixth order, whatever order you want. Okay, and each, as you increase the order of your technique, the more number of terms you will have to compute, but the accuracy of the solution also therefore increases. Okay, so this is one common technique that is used. What does MATLAB use? So MATLAB uses something called as ODE 45, ODE 45, which is the common solver used to solve the kind of differential equations that we are talking about. So ODE 45 is what is known as a variable step solver. So that h here, the time step that we take, that increment step, can be adaptively changed, depending on the way the solution is progressing. Variable step solver. So how does this solve the problem? It's a very simple procedure. I will quickly tell you how it does. As I said, with the Runge-Kutta technique, the higher the order of the technique, the more accurate the solution will be. So what this ODE 45 solver does, this 4, 5 have special meanings. The 4 here refers to Runge-Kutta 4. So the solver obtains the solution using the fourth order Runge-Kutta technique. It also obtains a solution using the fifth order Runge-Kutta technique. Both are obtained. Okay. Now, if the time step is adequately small, then the solution that you obtain using RK5 will very nearly be the same as the solution that you obtain using RK4, if the time step is sufficiently small. Because there will be some improvement in accuracy, but if the time step is adequately small, that improvement will be exceedingly small, 0.001% or whatever. Okay. Then the solver knows that the time step is adequate for this problem. But suppose it computes the solution using RK5, and that solution is substantially different from the solution it obtains using RK4. Okay, then the solver knows that my time step was not adequately small enough for me to capture the solution accurately. So what it does next, therefore, is to reduce the time step so that the solutions become closer to one another. So that's how this variability in the step size is brought about by the solver. It computes using RK4, also using RK5. Then it uses RK5 to advance the solution, but it also compares the solution obtained with RK5 with the solution obtained using RK4. If the error is substantial, then it uses that information that the error is substantial to reduce the step size for the next steps of the solution. Okay, so this procedure is also, this was developed by two other mathematicians by name Dorman and Prince. Dorman, Prince. So MATLAB therefore uses Dorman-Prince technique to solve the problem. Dorman-Prince comes under the umbrella of Runge-Kutta techniques. Okay, there are other techniques also which use multi-steps for solving this problem. So one method, I am just putting out the names there so that you are aware of them. This is just a single step method. It's called a single step method because you see, to obtain the solution for the next step, for the n+1 step, you're using information only about the solution at the nth step. You're using f is also a function of xn and tn, and xn+1 therefore is also a function of only xn and tn. That's why it's called a single step solution. You're only using information about the previous step, about a solution at the previous step. It's possible to improve the accuracy by using solutions from other previous steps also, xn-1, xn-2, and so on and so forth. Okay, and a general framework has been developed to obtain the solution by taking into account the solutions at the n-1, n-2, and so on and so forth, and they come under the umbrella of what are known as Adams techniques. Okay, or Adams method. These are multi-step solvers, by which it means that they use information about xn, xn minus 1, etc., for some length of there's a certain length for the string that you can also specify, and given that length, it will use the information for the previous steps to obtain xn plus 1. Okay, so you have therefore Runge-Kutta as your workhorse, the most basic of all solvers. Okay, and which is perfectly acceptable for most problems that we encounter. And in case there is a need to refine the step size along the way, then the MATLAB solver ODE45 automatically does that for you. So ODE45 is an Runge-Kutta solver, but with adaptive step size. Okay, multi-step solvers are also available, which are based on what is known as Adams technique. I don't have the time to talk about them, and it's also not very relevant for a course at this level. This is an introductory core course for you, so it's not necessary for us to know all these nitty-gritties of these other techniques. So I will not discuss them. So with that, I shall stop today's class. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, there are no questions, so I shall log off at this point. Rajpal Singh has a question. Yes.
Excuse me, sir. May I ask what is the syllabus for the midterm examinations?
Everything that was taught till today, but since I have instead of saying everything taught till today, let me refine it by saying everything that's there till homework 5.
Okay, sir. So since given the amount of new concepts introduced today and the problems with the online mode, may I request that syllabus be reduced to everything that was taught, say, until the end of the last week?
Well, as I said, if you look at homework 5, all this is not part of homework 5. Okay, even that derivation of that dynamics of the multi-body system, to some extent is part of homework 5, but not completely. So only up to homework 5. Okay, whatever is in homework 5 will define the syllabus. The solution techniques and so on will not be part of the syllabus. You don't need to worry about it. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay. If not, then I shall sign off now. Thanks a lot.